Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 7 of the Soul Surplus podcast. My name is Wes Pendleton. I am your host, along with my co-host, John Smythe. We are here to talk about sampling today, which is what we do as a company. Not only what we do, but what would you say, like 95% of producers do, Smythe?
Yeah, especially nowadays. You know, before maybe 40, 50 years ago, the technology it was kind of there, but it wasn't as developed as it is now, where, you know, you buy a DAW and you're suddenly, you know, you have a selection of loops and one shots at your disposal. So pretty much everybody starts off sampling some kind of way, you know?
Right. Dudes did not have a Soul Surplus at their fingertips to go buy samples. They had to literally play instruments.
They were the Soul Surplus.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to jump right into it. We've been really enjoying the last few episodes. You and I end up talking for just about an hour. So, you know, one of the things that you and I had talked about was skipping the preambles and just getting right into the topic. So we're going to start off and go right into what is sampling. So basically, as a music producer, if you don't know how to play an instrument and you want to find a melody, unless you're going to go take piano lessons, the next quickest thing is to go and find an old song, usually on record, for us older guys. Not as much these days, probably on YouTube for the younger generation. But you go and find an old song, and then you find the melody from that song. You cut that melody out, you splice it up, you make it into a new sound, or you just use a loop and you throw some drums on it, and voila, you are sampling an old song. So that's why they call it a sample, because you are taking a reference from an original track, and it's supposed to be small pieces of original track. That's why they call it sampling, because you're just taking, it's basically like walking up to the person that's giving out free chicken bites at Chick-fil-A and then taking, you know, one chicken bite and then keeping it moving. Now there's some people who will keep coming back and taking more chicken bites and more chicken bites until the person realizes, like, yo, you're taking mad chicken bites, no more. You know what I'm saying?
Or if you're Ghostface, then you sample, you just
the whole entire song,
rap over the Delphonics.
Exactly.
I love that track though. That song was fire to me though. I really love that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's still one of the, I mean, that's what makes Ghostface Ghostface. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so, you know, so basically, you know, that's what sampling is. So, you know, to kind of give a roundabout explanation, to finish off the explanation that we started, in order to do this the right way, you are able to sample anything. However, you are not necessarily able to distribute that song without getting a master clearance from whoever owns the rights to that particular song, which is where most producers run into issues, because they either don't have the clout to be able to contact the estate, they don't have enough money to pay a lawyer to get it cleared, they don't have enough money to just clear it, period, or they just don't know how to clear a sample. And so that's where companies like ours come in, where we provide, you know, sounds that are similar to those old records, and you're free and clear to use those sounds and not have to worry about anything. So that's what sampling is in a nutshell. It's an art form that has taken so many shapes and sizes. You think back to like the old early hip hop tracks that sampled was like a lot of disco. They were taking, you know, specific loops from the late 70s era, and then chopping it up and making it new stuff. Then you fast forward into the 80s and 90s, and then dudes are taking like stabs because there's only a certain amount that they can actually sample on the machines that they're using, like an ASR 10, you know, and then you move up into the MPC era where you could chop a little bit more, you know, Pete Rock, who else? Eric Sermon, Q-Tip, all these guys are, you know, sampling from old records. And then, you know, you fast forward from there into our generation, you know, you got Kanye, you got Dilla, you know, you got Madlib,
MF
you got
Doom.
Exactly. Then you got the newer young heads that are coming out now, a lot of who I'm not that familiar with, unfortunately. But yeah, sampling has it's weird. Soul sampling is probably the main place where people get their stuff from. But, you know, over the years, man, some of the greatest samples that we've heard from have come from rock, have come from, you know, acoustic songwriting type songs.
Yeah.
I know back in the day when I used to sample real heavy, I used to sample a lot of like European soundtracks. And so, yeah, man, it's an art form unto itself. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. You know, you'll hear people say, oh man, looping is cheating. I've literally heard people say like, man, looping is not sampling. That's just straight taking it and putting on the joint. It's just like, well, you know, to each his own, man. Sometimes you get that loop and you can't turn it down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about that a little later. Some of our favorite chops and actually, or some of our favorite samples. And one of my favorite is definitely just a straight up loop. But, you know, we'll talk about that later because
for sure,
you know, that's definitely an area of friction, an unnecessary area of friction between producers. It's like, yo, just do what you do. You know, if you have something against loops, then I feel like you just don't know how to find the good loops.
Yeah, for real. Straight up. Yeah, man. So that's what sampling is in a nutshell. We have a lot to cover in this episode. I'm really excited because this is more of my wheelhouse. Last episode was Smythe's wheelhouse. So I get to do just a little more talking this week, which I'm not too enthused about, but you know, it's okay.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do want to talk about finding that right snippet or finding that right loop or that right part to chop up in a sample. Are there certain things that you go to or that you're kind of looking for when you do sample a record?
Yeah, so I know with myself, I'm a little bit different in that I try not to sample anything with vocals unless it's on purpose. So with that being said, you know, the majority of the songs that are out, you know, have a singer on top of the track or singers. And so you're literally digging through tracks to find a section where you can literally just take one chord here, one chord there, and then piece those chords together to create basically, in essence, your own loop. And so I feel like that is probably my greatest talent, or I should say the talent that I lean on the most, is literally being able to find multiple chords within a track and make my own loop, and then people think it's an actual loop from the song. Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times I've talked to like a young up and coming producer, and they're just like, you know, so can you show me how you do that? And I'm like, well, you know, I pull Logic out and I'm like, you know, so when I created this, you know, this loop, this is what I did. And they're like, oh, it's not a loop. And it's just like, nah, it's literally a created loop. Like I created it, you know, from the chords that I found. So yeah, so, you know, like you said, finding that right section is definitely going to be something that takes a little bit of patience. Yeah. And that's why, you know, the famous saying, digging in the crates, it's a real thing. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Facts.
You know, back in the day, before we had all the software, but when I was using like Digital Performer at school, when I wasn't that good, you know, we would literally go to the record store and sit in the record store for hours. And but that's because, you know, you could take the record and you could go over to the station and then you could throw the headphones on, you could listen and basically listen through to a record to see if there was some heat on it, and before you would pay for it. So I definitely come from that era of picking the right portion of the sample can literally take me an entire day. Like I've literally gone to the record store at 10 in the morning and left at like 4 in the afternoon.
Yeah,
easily, and walked out with like 20 records for like, you know, $30 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Because I would pick from like the dollar bin. And then when I started making a little bit of money, you know, then I started moving up and getting like the $5 to $10 records. But then I found that I would only be able to grab like, you know, 3 records at a time, and that kind of was corny. So,
right.
So I went back to the dollar bin. But yeah, pretty much like, you know, picking the right portion is going to come down to, you know, how well your ear is. I'm a musician before producer, so I understand theory, you know, chord structure, the whole nine. So that kind of gives me a little bit of an advantage. But it really just comes down to having a really good ear, and being able to piece different chords together from different parts of the song.
Yeah. You know, when I started producing, I was only sampling, which is a far cry from where I am now. I actually prefer not to sample now. Not, of course, not because I think anything is wrong with it. I still enjoy sample-based music, probably more than I listen to just bands or whatever.
I was about to say, you're a Kanye stan, so you 100% love sampling.
Well, so I'm not a stan.
Yeah, I know. I'm just teasing, bro.
Okay.
You had to clear that up real quick.
Yo, because you know what? That's a funny segue because I actually did not like Kanye too much in his early days. I like the new Kanye better, which is a funny thing to say, but
no, I know I understand why you do, because I feel like he's a lot more musical.
Oh yeah.
And he takes a lot more gambles, that's your forte,
right?
You know, like once a month you do a sample pack that is like, Smythe, do whatever you want to do, and then you try to do that with another pack, and I'm like, all right, let's bring it back to to the normal people space.
Oh yeah. Yo, once we get off, I got some crazy ideas I got to share with you that I was thinking of, but it's funny.
I'll probably turn down each and every one of them. But I'm just joking.
But you know, like I grew up listening to jazz as a kid, and of course, you know, my brothers were real into hip hop. You know, they grew up on the 90s hip hop. Of course, my brother's a DJ, so like, you know, I was always listening to like the 70s jazz records that my parents would play, like the CTI or Blue Note kind of stuff, like Freddie Hubbard, Herbie Hancock, stuff like that, or even like sort of more into soul jazz, like Kool and the Gang, or I was listening to the producers that would sample them, like you said, Pete Rock or DJ Premier. So when I started making music, I was always listening for, you know, moments on, you know, like the Ahmad Jamal record that Pete Rock sampled for The World Is Yours. Or like Who Got the Props, Ronnie Laws. That's one of the illest loops ever, man. I love that. There's another one I was thinking of. I forget. But, you know, just kind of listening to those old jazz records and listening for loops like that. I was more of a loop guy. I wasn't really a chop, you know. I also was not too good back then. But
right.
But because of the program I was using, I wasn't using MIDI at all. I would just place things on the grid. So I had like these I'm a change man, but I had some of these illegally downloaded Dr. Dre kits, Ninth Wonder kits.
Terrible. Yo, you know what's funny? I don't mean to segue. I'm one of the few people, I've never stolen a plugin. I've never stolen software. I've never done it, yo.
Really? I
don't know what it is, but I've never had like stolen drums. I've never had stolen sounds. I've never had like even when I was coming up in school, like my dad just bought me Photoshop.
Really?
And like all my friends had cracked Photoshop in school. You know what I mean?
Well, you know what I think it is? I think it's a confidence thing, because I view myself differently. I view myself as, you know, I don't have to get something illegal. So now, like, you know, I'm completely legit, like at the DAW, and, you know, I buy drum kits now, you know, blah, blah, blah. Before, I didn't view myself as someone who was seriously making music. So it's just like, all right, well, I found this Timbaland kit, and this is in like 2000. It doesn't make it any better, but this is like 2005 or 6. So I was like 12. I think it was more like 2004. You know, I was 11. So, you know, it was just kind of like a learning thing. But of course, you know, I want to make it clear to everyone that I am completely legit now.
Yeah.
You know,
yep.
Especially like being in the business that we're in now, like it would just be a slap in the face for me not to be. I couldn't even find those sounds if I wanted to either. Those are gone. But yeah, you know, it was all about finding those 70s jazz records and finding the next World Is Yours, or finding the next Who Got the Props, or you know, like the beat miners kind of samples.
Right.
New York.
You know what? Because I didn't produce till I was like, I didn't start making. I'm not even gonna say I was producing because I definitely was not producing. Right. I was making beats.
Yeah.
So I first started making beats in college, and the album that really got me started was Black on Both Sides. And I'll still never forget the first time I heard Miss Fat Booty. I was like 19, and
that one is crazy.
I was sitting there and I was like, why have I heard this song? It was Ayatollah had what's the name of the song? It's an Aretha Franklin flip. I want to say I can't think of the name. I think it's called like One Step Ahead or One Step. That was the OG song by Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that and remembering, because we had that record at the crib.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've heard that song before. And then so when I heard it, I went back and grabbed the record and listened through. And so everybody obviously knows I know I can't afford to stop. But he literally chops up the sample in the hook. Like there's like 3 different parts in the hook, and it sounds like it's a loop, and it's not. It might actually be 4 different parts. And even when he goes back into the flip where the main part of the verse is, that part of the song, there's no key change. It's literally just this little small section of like a breakdown in chord. He took that and made the whole beat around that, and that right there sold me on the fact that producers were mad geniuses, because I was like, to be able to hear that and to be able to make a beat from that,
yeah,
is ridiculous. Because technically you hear that little section and it's just like, you're not supposed to be able to make a track from that particular thing. But you know, that's why like I hear, you know, some of these OG musicians, and like there's one in particular right now that I really have loved, you know, being a trumpeter as a kid. He's kind of like going out of his way right now to like really bash hip hop, and it's really bothering me.
Marsalis?
Yeah, I didn't want to bring up any names, but yeah.
Sorry.
But no, it's all good. Yeah, but you know, it's just like, come on, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like this art form has been birthed from the art form that you do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Like every kid doesn't have the opportunity to have a trumpet. Every kid doesn't have the opportunity for their dad to be like one of the greatest jazz musicians ever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But anyway, I digress. Yeah, like that's definitely like from a favorite chop, that's definitely one of my favorite chops. I'm trying to think of any other chops. There's probably like 1,000 Pete Rock chops that I'm still trying to wrap my brain around to try to figure out how in the world that he figured that out. Because Pete Rock was a huge inspiration for me when I first got started. It's mad funny because when people first heard my stuff, they were like, "Oh man, you sound a lot like Ninth Wonder," and I'm like, "Well, Ninth Wonder sounds a lot like Pete Rock, and I love Pete Rock."
Yeah.
So, you know,
especially the way that bounce in his drums.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yo, you know what? I don't mean to cut you off, but I really feel like we cannot go without talking about "Represent" by Nas. So you've heard that original sample before?
Yeah. Come on, man.
Yo, where the heck do you find something like that? Like, first of all, who's if you've seen the album cover before, the original, it's Lee Irwin, and it's a bunch of their instrumentals for silent films. And it's just like, yo, like Premiere is always, I remember reading an interview that he did recently, and he talked about how he was always known for picking the ones that people would be like, yo, what would make you sample this?
Right.
And "Represent" to me is just like, it's the epitome of the most simple, like it's just a loop. I think it's two bar loop, but it is masterfully done. And the way the drums hit, like, yo, like I just feel like I'm walking through like the housing projects in New York, listening to that song, yo.
Yeah.
Like you can literally see it. You know?
Yeah. You know what's crazy too? The dopest thing about Primo is not only does he sample while doing production, but he's also the greatest sample scratch producer for hooks.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the stuff that he finds, like you can't, like you put a Primo scratch hook on a record and that joint is gold.
Yeah.
Not sales, but just
right. That's funny.
Yeah.
You know, I actually had a question about that, and I remember I hit up my brother and I said, yo, like, whenever people scratch hooks, like, how don't you have to clear that? And he said, yeah, you clear it like any other record. So I was like, oh, so that's probably the reason why Primo, whenever he does scratch hooks, he's always scratching records that he produced. So like even looking, well, not always, but most of the times. So you know, I wish I had a really good example. The song where Big L is like, the crew is saying something. It's a song. Oh, you know, I can't remember all of it, but it's funny. Like, it creates this spider web of like Primo songs where you hear a song produced by Primo, you know, and then you hear the rapper say something in one of his verses, and then you're like, oh, I know that line from somewhere, and then you go back and you're like, oh, this is the original song, and then you listen to the one he sampled, and then you'll hear another one where, you know, it's just a endless like kind of loop, you know. I think that's also an interesting like kind of topic, is clearing scratch samples, you know.
Oh yeah, but you know what? You know what's interesting? I'm like 100% sure they didn't clear any of those scratch samples.
Now, okay, I feel like R. Kelly definitely got a piece of Unbelievable.
Well, I mean, but that's different. Like
okay.
To me, that's not like that's not a scratch sample. That's like, I'm talking about like when Primo does it, he finds like 4 different songs and then you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not Unbelievable. That's different. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
But I mean, it's still the same thing. But you know. But yeah, let's not get off on this tangent, because you and I could talk about old tracks for 1,000 years. So the next thing on the agenda was we were going to talk about looping versus chopping.
Right.
And we were actually going to showcase some of the joints. And I think I produced these tracks, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So these are tracks that we produced utilizing Soul Surplus sample packs that we put up for our music for video stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 2 tracks. The first track is Majesty, and that's an example of looping. The second track is Meditate, and that's going to be an example of chopping. So let's go ahead and throw Majesty on, and we'll let you guys hear what we're talking about. So that track is called Majesty, and if you actually stream that on YouTube, you'll see that it contains a sample from the Roadie sample pack.
Yeah, we'll put that link in the below so you guys can hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that track right there is an example of looping. So what I did was I took the main melody of the track, slowed it way down, pitched it, and then added some other elements underneath to kind of give it some differentiation. But that right there is an example of taking a section of the song, a pretty long section, and then just looping it over and over and over again. But that's the thing, like, you listen to that section, is like, you know, how can you not take that and make a beat out of that? You know what I'm saying? And so that's why you know what I'm saying? It just makes sense to do it that way.
I'm flattered.
So, yeah. I mean, your stuff is so loopable, it's ridiculous. I actually like your stuff is still my favorite stuff to sample from all of our packs.
Thanks, man.
Because I feel like I can get I feel I can go real deep into it. Not that, some of the other stuff is like, Joel will do stuff and it's so good that it's just like, how can you not just throw drums on this?
Right,
and
right,
just keep
exactly.
it moving. But I'm more of I tend to more chop. I like to chop a little bit more. But anyway, let's get into the second track. This track is called Meditate, and this track is going to be more of an example of chopping. And this track actually came from the Roadie sample pack as well. But this one is a little bit more chopped. So let's check this one out. So if you listen to that was actually, Meditate was actually produced by John McNeil, who a lot of people don't know is extremely gifted producer.
Yeah.
But yeah, you hear in that track how John took a couple different pieces of elements and kind of created a brand new melody that's not necessarily present in the original.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember I came across that just kind of looking at some of the stuff we have up on our YouTube page, and I heard it and I was like, man, that, like, he really took that. Now what was that called? I think that was called Romans, I think.
Yep.
He took it and it was like, in a good way, just completely changed it.
Yep.
Into something that I would not have guessed making it that it would become,
Yep.
I think
and therein lies the beauty, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that right there is, pretty much exactly, I feel like loops are great. I'm not even going to say this. I was about to say that's what makes chopping so dope compared to looping, but I don't want to compare them because there's really no right or wrong way to do this.
Yeah.
No, but so you can see, so you see the difference in these two tracks. Two totally different methods used in creating both tracks, but both equally effective, both, creating an atmosphere, creating, the mood for, the track. And so, like even like the second one is like really, really moody, even though the OG isn't moody, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And even in Majesty, the first one that we played, because it's so slowed down and is pitched down, it sounds, the original is a lot more bright, you know what I'm saying? But this track, because it's so slowed down, has more of like this mellow feel, you know what I mean? So yeah, man. So when I gotta ask you this, because I think this definitely kind of goes in more into your wheelhouse a bit. So when you're mixing and you're fitting a sample in with the rest of your track, because you're using instruments too,
right?
How are you processing that stuff, and like how are you, like when you sample, how do you mix that stuff within your beat?
Right. So I think a good example is we could probably play this too, for the B3 pack that Swoop absolutely killed. I actually made a demo track for that, and so I remember I sent you the first pass of the mix, and the way I had mixed that organ in, I kind of mix it in the way you would mix an organ in regularly, which is organs usually sit in the back of a track.
Right.
So what I did to that, I high passed it a lot because in that sample, he's playing the foot pedals or the the bass. So I could have left it in, but I wanted to do my own bass line.
Right.
So I high passed it. So that's already you're already going to be able to fit that in kind of in the space above the bass. I believe I did some kind of some sort of like light saturation to kind of make it sound more like a sample.
Right.
Kind of more like dramatically like a sample. So it kind of takes on its own space. So some kind of saturation. And then I think I did some a little more EQ cuts, I believe. Probably in the mid range to fit some other instruments in there. But of course, like this stuff depends on like what kind of sample it is and how you want it to sit there. But I remember the second pass you had me push the organ up a little bit more, just to showcase it.
Yeah, I was like, you do realize this is the demo for the organ,
right,
not for your beat.
Right.
I was like, please bring the organ to the front of the track, thank you.
Right. And so the way I did that, I remember, I think I pushed the bass down a little bit. I turned the organ up, and I sort of kind of ducked the synths down a little bit, not too much, so where everything was still kind of where it was. The organ was just a little bit louder. But you know, there's other times where, you know, there's samples maybe you want them to still have the same kind of brilliance, but what makes it sound sort of sampley, for lack of a better word, is the way you chop it. So like, you know, there's stuff like real obvious, like Otis, which is probably, you know, one of the better chops, and not really, because it's not really a chop. It's more of just very tasteful, you know, from Watch the Throne, Jay-Z and Kanye.
Yep.
Where that sample doesn't really have a lot of processing on it.
Right.
But it's where where it has that sort of character is the fact that it's looped like that, you know? Yep. So like there's some samples that you want to keep that brilliance, you want to keep the sound of it. So you're probably going to just kind of EQ it to fit around your instruments. But yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. I just treat it like it's, you know, it's not that special. It's another instrument, you know?
Yeah, straight up. Yeah. So my technique is just like you, I tend to do a lot of high passing. So here's a little tip that I'm about to throw out there. And I think that this is really the most useful if you do know a bit of music theory. So my favorite thing to do is to find what I like to call ambiguous treble marks, where, so perfect example, you heard this track that I just sampled actually from one of your packs, from the Daydream pack. And when you tend to play, you tend to also throw some low register in there as well, even though you're playing guitar. But what I like to do is I like to go in and actually high pass it and take out those low markers, because that chord can be interpreted in many different ways depending on where the bass line is going.
Genius.
And so I do that incessantly. So I'll find something that doesn't necessarily, that has the marks of, oh, the chord is going this way. But if you actually cut the frequencies at about 500 to 600 and there's no register of any of that low, any of those low markers, you can actually tailor make the actual chord structure of the sample just by changing the bass line and taking it into a different place. So that's a little bag of Skittles for you young folks out there, or even some of you old heads that might be listening to. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of create your own sample utilizing an old sample. So I can go back, especially when I first started, when I didn't have a lot of plugins, I didn't have a lot of tools. Literally all I had was EQ and reverb. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so basically I would find these samples and I would be like, you know, this sample is too happy, but this chord, or, you know, this arpeggio or whatever, I don't even know what the right word would be. The thing that's making it sound happy is wherever the bass is taking it. So I would cut it and then put like this minor bass down at the bottom, and would completely change the sample. Exactly. And so dudes would be listening to this. Like I sampled this old, man, it was probably like a 60s record, like a 1965, 66. It's like an old boy band, not boy band, but more in the line of like Beach Boys is like technically like a boys band, so to say.
Yeah.
So it was one of those types of things, and super happy, and these guys are bouncing around. Man, I pitched that joint down and cut all the bottom out, and then added like this menacing, growling bass line.
Yeah.
And it was still like one of the hardest tracks I've ever done. People were coming up to me like, yo, man, this track is hard. And I'm like, these dudes were literally playing soccer in the sand on this on this track before I changed it. You know what I mean?
Facts, yo.
Yeah. So I mean, there's so much that you can do when mixing your samples to give it like the presence that it needs in a track. You don't necessarily always have to take it as it is. You can definitely take it to different places, man. So when you sample, I tend to like to sample off vinyl.
Yeah.
Like way more. What are you? Are you a analog guy, or are you the digital guy?
Oh, when it comes to sampling, I've always been digital. That's how I started.
Yeah. See, that's the funny thing is, I don't care. Like it doesn't matter, because you're going to process the sample anyway.
Yeah.
So it kind of doesn't really matter. Like we process some of our stuff and it sounds old, but we literally did it in the studio yesterday.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, and that's part of the technique that we use is, we know that you guys like to hear stuff that might sound like it's from 1977, but, we make it to sound that way. We made it in 2018.
Yeah.
So you're more a digital guy. My fault. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all good. I also wanted to add, I did some research a few weeks ago. I found out that Ninth Wonder sampled Hiatus Coyote on Duckworth.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
Part. Had no idea. And obviously, I mean, they probably had something on vinyl, but they're not. Hiatus Coyote isn't making stuff on tape,
Right.
So
right.
And he probably did sample a digital version of it. Who knows,
Right.
But yeah, I started sampling digitally, like I said, maybe 15 years ago. Was it 15? Maybe, yeah, almost 13, 14 years ago. But the thing is, I did my own version of digging, which was finding those old records, but just in like MP3 format.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is I would say, okay, well, I know that Pete Rock sampled Ahmad Jamal, so I would just go and just find like a whole bunch of Ahmad Jamal records, or even like the one that The Stakes Is High, that Dilla did for De La Soul, which is fire too. Like I would find those albums and I would see what else was on that record, and then I would load it into a program called Record Producer, which I have. I don't even know if they exist anymore. I would love to like see what they've become, but yeah. So I would load it in. Like I said, I was never using MIDI. I would just put it on the grid.
Right.
Back then, I didn't really know how to fit a sample into into a track. So a lot of my stuff, maybe I could show you. Like it's pretty hilarious, some of the stuff I was sampling.
Right. Did you hear Streams of Thought Volume 1, the new Black Thought record?
No, you're like the 50th person to ask me that question.
Okay, because low key that record is probably, so Fonte's album and this album are probably my favorite rap albums this year.
Really?
Yeah, Fonte's album is really good. Did you hear Fonte's joint?
No.
Okay, you know who Fonte Coleman is, right?
Yeah, little brother.
Oh, okay, cool. But have you haven't heard his latest joint?
No.
Okay, so you need to go ahead and go listen to that.
Let's stop the podcast. I'll go listen to it now.
Yeah. Nah, but like, I mean, it's called No News Is Good News.
Okay.
And I mean, you know, obviously I'm coming from a perspective of an older guy. You know, I definitely, I still don't know how I feel about the Kanye record. But I do really like the new Cudi record. That's really good. I ran that joint back like 6 times back to back to back. But anyway, I'm not going down the street.
Yeah.
But on the getting back to the Black Thought album, the Streams of Thought record, Crisis. So it was a collab record between Ninth Wonder and the Soul. Forget what the group is called, but it's basically like Ninth and Crisis. Remember Crisis? So he did a lot of the Little Brother tracks back in the day too.
Really?
Yeah, like a lot of times people would think, or you know what he did, especially, did you hear Big Pooh's Sleepers?
No, see, it's funny. I've only heard the Minstrel Show.
Oh, dude, listen, go back and listen to The Listening and Sleepers. So Sleepers is Big Pooh's first solo record.
Okay.
Dude, listen, Sleepers is still one of my favorite records, and I feel like it's like slept on, but Crisis is all over that record.
Okay.
But anyway, so Crisis, he actually co-produced on the last track, Thank You, and he actually sampled D'Angelo, the Charade.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so like you remember how you were just saying like Ninth, you know, sampled Highest Coyote. Like those dudes will literally sample something from today and it's still fire.
Yeah.
So I'm actually low key about to start doing that every now and again. The only problem is like I'm not trying to clear these samples.
Yeah, nah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So, but like that just goes to prove, like, you know, you don't have to pull something from 1972 to have a fire soul sample. You know what I'm saying? So I guess that even talking about having to get something cleared, let's go into the pros and cons of sampling. I kind of feel like we're flying through this. This is such a great topic, bro. I could talk about sampling for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So some of the pros would be what? Bringing outside textures to your music.
Yeah.
That may not be readily available. What else?
It brings an element of musicality depending on the sample.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know why samples sound really good? Because like a lot of times, you know, I would hear people say, yeah, I try to like, you know, get guys in the studio and like we tried to make this sample, but it just didn't sound as good as I thought. And I always say to them, well, it's because it's not mastered.
Right, exactly.
And they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. It's like, yeah. So you throw a sample into a record and the texture of your drums 9 times out of 10 does not match what the sample is, and that's why the sample can just fit right into the track.
Yeah.
So yeah. But
know
yeah,
what?
you were saying yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say like the other part of it is that song is a finished thought.
Yep.
Like that song is done. Like it was intended to be one thing and that's what it is. So now you're taking something that's finished, you know, not just from a mastering standpoint, but like you're not trying to figure out chords or you're not trying to figure, you know, melody out. Like this song is done and you're infusing something that's done already. So I think it adds like an element of it's almost like, you know, certain decisions are just kind of like made already. So right. It kind of adds like it sounds intentional in a way if you do it right, you know?
Right.
So yeah, and then of course, like you said, it's mastered. So even from like a technical standpoint, like it's compressed. Everything sounds together. So you're adding that to your music. Recently I have not been sampling as much, and one of the things that I've been really aware of is the texture of sampling, and that's something that I don't really. I feel like sometimes I'm missing out on. But to me, one of the cons we're about to talk about outweighs that for me. So in the end, like I kind of don't care. But you know, like when I listen to like Ninth Wonder, or I listen to old like 90s hip hop, or you know, any of my, or especially Kanye. I think Kanye is probably the one that I appreciate the most for this. There's textures in those songs that to me, like, yo, it's really hard to duplicate if you're playing everything yourself, you know?
Right.
Especially like Life of Pablo stuff. Like that to me is the most high class produced Kanye project. Right.
Let me ask you this too, because I thought maybe it was just me, but is Kanye intentionally leaving the texture in the OG samples? Because you know how it is, like we still, like as a producer, it's real easy to start to filter and, you know what I'm saying, start to cut frequencies and things like that. But I swear when I listen to Kanye stuff, I don't think he's cutting any frequencies. I think he's altering the vocals on top to match.
Yo, you know what? I think it's almost how have you ever listened to 40 talk about sort of like the filtering thing that he does, or that he did, like with Take Care and like, you know, that sort of like moody kind of Drake stuff where he's not really filtering. I'm trying to remember what he's doing. He's literally like, he's not cutting anything. But I say that to say I think Kanye is kind of doing the same thing, and it's kind of what he's been doing. Like one of my favorite tracks is Everything I Am.
Yes.
Off Graduation. Where it sounds like he's rapping on top of the sample, you know? But I just think there's probably a process that's not EQ. Because as we talked about in the last podcast, like, and this is all speculation that I'm saying about this Kanye track, but as we talked about the last podcast, like EQing can really change something.
Right.
So if you're cutting frequencies in the vocals, it's gonna sound funny. And we all know Kanye's vocals, that's another thing that he does, or his engineers do really well, is mix his vocals. He has like one of my favorite vocal mixes. But like you said, the samples, like it doesn't sound like there's any frequencies cut in that either.
Right.
So I feel like there's some kind of process. Maybe it's like a saturation or it's got to be something. But it just doesn't sound like, you know, there's like drastic things being done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but like, also too the way that his samples sound in old Kanye compared to new, like in the old stuff, that stuff is EQ'd. Like I can hear it as clear as day. I'm talking about his new stuff, like Life of Pablo and Ye. Them joints literally sound like they came right off the record, and he's not touching them.
Right.
And it's such and the fact, like you said, the fact that like his vocal sits right on top of the record.
Yeah.
It's weird. It sits on top, but it cuts right through at the same time. Because sitting on top of the record with a vocal is not always a good thing. I don't want to digress and get into mixing, but yeah, it's just an amazing. Still to this day, like just hearing the last 3 records between Ye, the Pusha album that came out the week before that, and then this Kid Cudi joint that came out last weekend. You know, that the funny thing is, like, Kanye will never, nobody, for all the weird stuff that's kind of going on outside of the music, nobody will ever be able to say that he's not one of the best producers of our generation. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so those are some of the pros. Let's get into some of the cons, which is really the cons are why our business or our business exists. So obviously clearing a sample is what can be wildly expensive and can create all types of hassles. A producer inherently is not trying to do anything with hassle. That's why they're sampling, because if they wanted some hassle, they would go hire some musicians and then tell dudes what to do. So, you know, producers tend to go in the direction of trying to get stuff done fast and without, you know, they're more about the mood as opposed to the paperwork. So you know, you want to throw off, like, you want to really mess up somebody's mood creatively, have them start thinking about all the legal documentation and all the money they're going to lose because they use somebody else's song in a record. It's the worst. It's literally the worst. So I've definitely got stories for days of having to go through that process, and You want to talk about dizzying? It is the worst. It's literally the worst. And it got to a point where I was just like, you know what? I don't think I can do this anymore. And that's why I love, these companies like our company or MSX Audio. Those guys are doing just great work. I mean, you could take their stuff, chop it up, make it your own.
Right.
And, obviously if you with MSX, you're still gonna have to get that master clearance. Well worth it. If you're gonna use MSX stuff, get it cleared. They'll look out for you. But yeah, what I'm saying, just between, them and then, Frank Duke's library, which was, one of the first libraries that I heard where I was just like, wow, this sounds vintage. It's just a lot of things that you can take, a lot of places that you can go, without having to worry about that. And then also the other con is, which I figured a workaround, but it can confine you to specific chord structures within the sample, so you kind of can only go in one or two directions. But if you take those Skittles like I gave you earlier, you could go in as many directions as you like.
Right. Yeah, so that con is what I was talking about, the one that kind of outweighs everything for me, because I was more of a loop kind of guy. And like the more I got into songwriting and composing and creating my own music, like I started playing more instruments. It just kind of, I just prefer starting from nothing and not having to like play certain notes, because no matter how you chop something up, you're gonna have to be in the key of that sample. There's kind of no way around it, like even if you take it from C major to B major, well, now you gotta play in B major, And even if you wanted to kind of create a chord progression, your own custom chord progression, at that point I would rather just play it and not have to use the sample, if I wanted to go that far into it. Yeah, like I've always felt like it kind of restricted me a little bit. But at the time when I was sampling the most, of course, I wasn't playing anything at that time. So,
right.
Yeah, and it's, of course, again, it's not better or worse than completely original productions. But it's just, what works for you. Again, like it's, your workflow. If you find yourself, you get more inspired through samples, which makes a lot of sense. Like that's what you do,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So let's go ahead and round out this episode. We're going to get into 3 tips for successful sampling. Number 1 would be to EQ your sample to fit your track. Always important. Yeah. Number 2 would be time stretching and pitch correcting your samples to make sure that everything is in the right key, because I've definitely heard way too many tracks where I don't know what the producer was thinking about, but it sounds like oatmeal, basically.
Yeah, the producer was thinking about lunch.
Yeah.
Thinking about getting breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. And then number 3, you want to listen through the whole sample to salvage everything that's worth sampling. I can't stress that particular point enough. I've heard stuff in the vamp going out at the end of a record, and literally when I had to capture the sample, I had to go back and then adjust the gain as it was going out so I could keep an even volume level as the sample was going out, just so I could capture that little bit. And it was literally in the last 6 seconds of a song.
Yeah.
When I was about to like grab the needle and go to the next one, it was like, oh. So yeah, definitely listen all the way to the end, because there's definitely going to be some gems. There's one particular joint in Portridge Volume 1. I can't remember which particular track it is. It might be 68 or 29th and Edgemont, I think what the track is. That track is like, there's so much loopable stuff in that whole track, but there's this one part at the end of the track that is just like, you could take that and primo that to death. Yeah, like it sounds like something that primo would take. So
I'm gonna give 2 examples of producers that listen to the whole sample. I think I'm gonna bring up Kanye again. I'm gonna talk about Father Stretch My Hands.
Which wasn't Kanye, that was Metro Boomin, but I'll let you cook.
It's funny how that's still just as funny.
Yep.
But yeah, listening through that whole song, it's a pretty dope song too. The original is by Pastor T.L. Barrett, and you have to get 3 minutes into the song before you hear the intro.
It's well into there, bro.
Yeah. The other one is the next episode by Dr. Dre. And I think that one is still kind of generally in the beginning of the song. I wish I could remember. I want to say McDermott. I forgot his name, the original. I can't remember. But I remember when I first started sampling, I would get in the habit of, if I didn't hear something loopable in the first 10 seconds of the song, I'm like, this joint is whack, and then go to the next. But when I listened to that, because of course I told you guys I was downloading those records that people already sampled, and I heard it, and so of course you hear that beginning before the beat drops with the horns. And then the second half of that beginning part is not until 2 or 4 bars later. And then, but the thing is, the way Drake did it, he put it together. And then the part with the guitar is further into the song. It's just the way he put it together was really masterful. Yeah. But anybody could easily get caught up in, these horn samples are crazy, let's just loop this, and then before you know it, you're done with the record. You're not even listening to it, where there's definitely some heat on there,
Right. It's crazy too, because that song is actually interpolated. It's not even sampled. It's an interpolation of David Axelrod's and David McCollum's The Edge. So they sampled it and then replayed it.
Really?
Yeah, which is, Dr. Dre, his old stuff is just 100% sample, but a lot of stuff from 2000 and forward is a lot. It's just musicians. So what you'll hear in a lot of Dre's newer stuff is just a lot of interpolation. And even some of the old joints, there still was a lot of heavy instrumentation, even if there was a sample there. And that's why his mixes have always sounded like, why does this sound so good? And this was made in 1995.
You know what, man? But that's why DJ Quick, I don't know if I've talked about this on this podcast. DJ Quick is probably top 2, man. I don't know. For me personally.
On the low.
Yeah. Because and that's the West Coast thing, man. Adding those instruments in.
Right.
And I could go on forever about how the West Coast is just dope for that, because even Kendrick continued that with To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yep. Mixing
in instruments. But anyway, like you said, mixing those instruments in, DJ Quick would do that. Even now, his more recent stuff, he's playing guitar. But even back in the day, he would hire musicians, and add on to these samples. But you probably already know this. Quick helped out with a lot of Dre stuff, Tupac, but even going into the Chronic, and even Get Rich or Die Trying. DJ Quick is responsible for a lot of that drum programming.
Yep.
Yeah, Quick is one of my favorite, man. But his stuff on his own, to me, is just the Born and Raised in Compton with that Isaac Hayes loop. Man.
Yeah, man, it's good stuff. It's good stuff, man. So, well, guys, we appreciate you listening in. Once again, we hope that you subscribe to the show. We are on iTunes as well as SoundCloud. I'm really having an issue with Google Play. I'm not really sure what's going on. There's a holdup. And we're also going to get the podcast up on Stitcher within the next week or so. But in the meantime, it's also on SoundCloud, which is free platform. So if you can't hear it on iTunes, you can hear it there. Also, each episode is uploaded every Saturday on YouTube. So if you're a YouTube subscriber, you can hear it there. But we thank you once again for listening to the show. Follow us on social media. We're at Soul Surplus on pretty much every medium, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're even on LinkedIn. Connect with us. We are there. And make sure you hop over to the site, check out our latest products, and we will see you guys next week. Peace.
Peace.